Hey, everybody. I have the internet's busiest music nerd. So how you been doing?
I've been doing good. How are you? What's going on?
I thought that I should first introduce you to the people on my channel that may not know who you are. I just assume everybody knows who you are, but Anthony Fantano has two different YouTube channels. I've been following you on both your channels since probably 2018, 2019. You have Fantano, and then you have The Needle Drop. Can you tell people what the difference is between the two channels?
Yeah, I mean, I have both those channels. I have the Twitch page as well. I'm all over the place. I'm spreading like
You are
a disease.
all over the place, and I follow you on multiple platforms.
Yeah, we're TikTok mutuals as well, I believe too. So
Yes,
we're everywhere together. But yeah, the Needle Drop channel is mostly music reviews. On the streaming platforms, we usually do kind of like live reactions to stuff when it comes out on New Music Fridays, especially. On the Fantano channel, we usually just kind of like do a lot of side music industry commentary and just talk about more general music discourse and, commentary that may be happening in the music sphere broadly. But that's basically kind of the separation between the two. I mean, it's not, a super, I think, bold line separating both of them, but it's a lot of content coming out every week, and it's so much that it doesn't really make sense to upload all of it to one channel. In my view,
how have you navigated things along the way, like all the content ID things that are in place on the different platforms, especially YouTube, which early on for me was a real problem as far as playing things and talking about them. What's your history with that?
I mean, there are some videos, especially on the Fantano channel, that we upload that, occasionally will feature some material from the music that I'm actually kind of reviewing and talking about. But honestly, like I started reviewing music on YouTube back in like 2009. And that was a time period where, the content ID stuff and what your channel could get banned for, it was even more stringent. It was even crazy.
Yeah, what was that like? What was that like?
Well, I mean, frankly, I used to play like music clips in my reviews. I would literally refer to a specific part of a song, and then I would edit in like a 3-4 second clip of that part of the song just to like, illustrate something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even in a positive sense. But with that being said, like that was not. As soon as my channel got partnered or was getting close to being partnered, I had like a contact, somebody who reached out at YouTube who was kind of like a liaison at the time, which is kind of like a funny thing to say because these days they like, they say, oh, if you have any issues, tweet at the YouTube Twitter page, which is like insane. That's how essentially they're doing customer service now for like their channels and, their user base. But anyway, I had this person telling me like, yeah, keep in mind, I kind of stopped this practice by this point that I had gotten partnered. And he said like, yeah, all these old videos where you're kind of like doing that, if these videos stay up, your channel's probably going to get flushed down the toilet. And I said like, well, what if I just like make them private or something? And he's like, if they're private, they're still in the system and likely to be picked up by the bot or whatever. And your channel could still be like completely obliterated. I was like, okay. And I just like deleted over a year's worth of videos right then and there. And from that point forward, like the way I work through it or address it is that I just completely avoid it, outside of like a spare moment here and there where I feel like maybe I really need to illustrate something, or if I have to do a reaction, and typically if I am, that's going kind of like on the streaming page and like a dedicated channel for that so that it doesn't get like mixed up with everything else and potentially endanger anything else that I'm doing. It's ridiculous. It's not something I'm happy about, especially since like the law when it comes to fair use and opinion and commentary is pretty black and white at this point, but the thing is like rights holders and labels just like have such a sway and so much influence with these platforms that there's like not really much that you as a creator can do, in terms of like actually taking issue with it. They talk about it, and if you try to sort of like advocate for yourself on the basis of fair use, there's all of this sort of like interface stuff on the back end that, makes it seem really scary. Like, oh, remember, you're signing like a legal document here. You could end up in court if you say or click the wrong thing. And it's like, okay, but if the rights holders really don't want their music in your video, they just take the friggin' video down anyway. Like, no label is taking any YouTuber into court over, right, the use of a song in a video. They're just telling YouTube to take the video down, and they're doing it. Which again is unfortunate and sad that there isn't sort of like, an actual kind of process. Well,
that is 100% correct that no YouTuber's ever gone to court for having a song in their video.
Right. Yeah. And again, I don't know how many times you or anyone you've worked with has had to sort of like, do this or fill out that sort of thing. Another thing that I remember about YouTube, I don't even know if this is the case anymore. Like, it used to be that if you had like a piece of media or content in your video, in order to sort of like, fill out the DMCA thing, they used to have to make you watch some like stupid animated PSA featuring Happy Tree Friends, which is like this old Flash cartoon IP that like back in the day was really funny. But like, in the context of like having to fight a record label for like, the rights to kind of like, use a song or to do some commentary or opinion on a piece of media that they own is like, it just so speaks to a level of like low professionalism that it's like, here's an animated short hosted by SpongeBob to teach you about the DMCA. It's like, why am I doing this? I'm a full-grown adult. I don't need to learn what the DMCA is and what fair use is. I know what it is. You guys don't know what the hell it is. That's the problem. And you're making me watch a cartoon to learn about it. So it's the way I navigate it is I just avoid it, and I challenge myself to try to describe the music and give my opinion on it as boldly and as upfront as I possibly can, so that I kind of have to overcome that obstacle by being colorful and descriptive with my language, so that because I can't rely on the ability to incorporate a recording into a piece of work that I'm doing.
Well, everything that you do is fair use. Any type of album critique is for sure fair use, no question about it.
No, it is.
I testified in a congressional hearing back in 2021, maybe something like that. One of the hearings Don Henley was in. I didn't happen to be in the same hearing, but it was a hearing on fair use, and they've not done anything about the law. I testified on one on AI as well, but now they're saying that completely generative content can't be copyrighted. I'd love to know your thoughts now as you're starting to see things creep in. You had a really interesting guest talking about Spotify last week.
I just finished this new and fantastic book, Mood Machine. It's a work by journalist and music writer Miss Liz Pelly.
Can you talk about this, some of the things there?
The interview that you're talking about is with writer and author Liz Pelly. She has a new book out called Mood Machine, and it's a pretty lengthy multi-chapter deep dive into just all of the nasty bits about Spotify's business model. I've read through the book cover to cover. I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic read. Not only did I get more details on stuff that I've already known, but I learned a whole lot too in terms of like just how preposterous things have kind of gotten over there in terms of, its functions and how much kind of like AI is beginning to play a role in Spotify doing this kind of slow roll toward, I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where artists are fully replaced, but they're definitely
they're going to try.
Well, they're definitely cutting as many corners as they can on the back end to save themselves as much money as possible, especially on these playlists where they know for a fact that people just sort of have them on in the background. They're not really paying attention. Maybe it's chill music and ambient stuff. Maybe it's like kind of just background, very relaxed jazz or electronic music and so on and so forth. And, you know, if you ever do happen to find yourself listening to one of those playlists, actually look at the playlist and maybe click through some of those pages. Listen specifically to some of those songs that you're hearing, because if you actually do click through some of those pages, you may find that, like, hey, you know, this song's on here, has millions of streams, and yet the artist that, you know, is named behind it, they have no social media. They have no page.
Right.
They have no following.
Yes.
They have no albums. They have no discography. They have no output. They have no anything. And if they do, it's just like a bunch of contributions to playlists like this, you know? And that may, in fact, in those cases, be either generated AI music, or like, you know, a nameless, faceless artist who essentially like kind of walked into a studio and, you know, booked a session with a couple of people, got paid several $1,000s, just basically cut some background electronica or just like, you know, bad lo-fi hip hop beats and just like,
We
you know,
call
put
that
it in this playlist.
like library music is what my friends do that.
You know, she does actually kind of connect it to the history of like Muzak. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Which, like, you know, there's a time and a place for that sort of thing. But the thing is, like, in the past, and as you know, and people who who've worked in that sort of industry, like, usually that stuff is placed and used for a specific use purpose, and it's labeled adequately. It's not slipped into playlists where it's like, you know, given to you by a music streaming platform. It's like, yeah, hey, discover music. You know, we're teaching you and, you know, helping you discover some music that you like really like. And when in fact, like, you're just kind of being served like fake AI slop or something like that. We've done lots of videos about Spotify that deal in that. That deal in, you know, just like the ongoing monetary squeeze that they're doing on artists, you know, the fact that like they kind of sit there and continue to act like we're paying artists as much as we can't pay them anymore. They pass the buck over to the labels as well. We actually pay the labels and the rights holders, and the labels are the ones who pay the artists. You know, meanwhile, Daniel Ek and other people who are, you know, at the top at Spotify are cashing out their stock to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars multiple times a year. The major labels have, you know, an investment in Spotify as well, so they have a monetary interest in the platform succeeding, because the more money Spotify makes, the more money they make too. It's just all like a very intertwined web of conflicts of interest. And, you know, once you read the book and sort of like understand the general inner workings of all of it, you see how they're all in cahoots in terms of like, you know, this agreed upon ability to sort of just like rip artists off and just like, you know, continue to pull as much money out of their pocket as possible. You know, it used to be back in the day, and I've been kind of refreshing on this because I've been reading a great deep dive into the life of, you know, rapper MF Doom in this book that's been released recently. And, you know, I got a reminder of like, you know, the first, how the music industry used to work back in the 90s. And it discussed like the first deal that he and his brother had gotten when they were in this, you know, rap group called KMD. And it's like, oh, you know, their deal was like hundreds of thousands of dollars. But as you know, because you're a veteran at this point, you know, back in the day when you would get those kinds of deals, it would be a lot of money up front, but then simultaneously you're getting charged for the studio time. You're getting charged for this by the label, and you essentially get nickeled and dimed to the point where you don't recoup anything, you know, and this is just like kind of the new version of that. You know, it's like the labels have found a new way to sort of like put artists in position to where it seems like they're making a lot of money up front. They're getting a lot of access. There's a lot of potential there, but then they turn around and they essentially own nothing, and they've made nothing, and they've essentially, you know, again, been ripped off, and any penny that they made on their music has been just, you know, kind of redirected into the pockets of the middlemen, of label CEOs and rights holders and shareholders and so on and so forth.
To your point, in January of last year, 2024, Spotify was trading at about $181 a share. It's gone up that much. I mean, that is a massive increase.
That investment jump is just a further sign of Spotify's lobbying dollars paying off, how effectively they are just so well connected and accepted. At one point, the company was like a canary in the coal mine, you know, for streaming broadly on the internet. But now they're just, they're nearly a label subsidiary in terms of like, you know, the common interest being shared between them and the majors. And, you know, as a result of that, investors know that Spotify is like one of the safest bets that you can make.
Yes.
You know, it's like that stock is not going anywhere because, you know, it's streaming is here, streaming is now. It's not going down. It's only growing in terms of its influence and its power. You know, really the only people at this point who could do anything and shut off the faucet are the rights holders, and they're not saying no. You know, they're fully on the train. You know, they're throwing coal into the steam engine. So
what do you think the artists are going to do as far as the embrace of AI? I mean, every songwriter I talk to that I know in Nashville or out in LA tells me that ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, you know, AI program are being used for lyrics now. That's just a common thing. With Suno and Udio or Udio, however you pronounce it. What do you think artists are going to do? Are artists going to basically farm out their creativity to these AI programs?
I mean, some of them and the most disappointing among them will, you know, for sure. I mean, again, I'm not coming on here to sort of like make a bold stance and say all uses of AI and sort of like a, you know, creative context are wrong or bad or sort of like, you know, inherently result in bad art or whatever's like, you know, just bad entertainment. I mean, you know, I was one of many who last year thought that like Metro Boomin BBL Drizzy song was really funny. You know, but the thing about that track is that it samples this sound, this instrumental that sounds like, you know, sort of like an old 60s or soul chop, you know, that you would get in a hip hop beat. But the thing is, like, it's a fake song in that style generated by AI where the lyricist is singing about Drake having a Brazilian butt lift. You know, it's a total anachronism. That could never exist. You know, there's no soul band in the 70s singing about that, you know?
Right.
But the thing is, like, he sampled that and he turned it into an actual beat and, you know, people loved it. It was very entertaining. There's a recent JPEG Mafia album, this rapper producer who I'm a fan of, you know, is kind of an example of a similar thing. He has this song where, you know, he's rapping on it. He produced the instrumental himself, but a part of the instrumental is a sample of what sounds like, again, a song from like the soul era, you know, that classic kind of soul single vinyl crackle feel, but it's an AI generated song. You know, there's tons of these fake soul songs all over YouTube that sound like they're something from that era, but they're not. They're an AI figment of your imagination. So, you know, I don't think it's inherently bad in all cases, but simultaneously I saw a clip go up on social media recently where Kanye is kind of like showing, because he's kind of, you know, touting the use of AI in his upcoming album. A lot of these artists now use like either ghostwriters or people who sort of like come up with lyrics or flows for them. And on the back end, and they sort of like will re-record those ideas in sort of like a new session. And he showed how this guy sort of doing exactly that was able to just kind of use AI to turn his vocals into something that sound like Kanye's vocals, as opposed to Kanye having to re-record that himself. So it's like, you know, you're kind of doing it in a way that is even lazier than having somebody do all the writing for you. And there were a lot of fans who were very disappointed by that because, you know, as much as Kanye can be pretty controversial, his fans do actually want to hear his actual voice, you know, coming out of his mouth. And, you know, they were kind of shocked and disappointed to sort of like see that. You know, and I think in cases like that, it can feel really, there's a sort of disillusionment there, and there's, you know, a sadness that I think kind of creeps in when it's like, oh, the voice that I'm hearing of this person who I'm, you know, supposedly a fan of, who I think, you know, makes great art, the person who I'm hearing may not even be them. It may just be a person using some kind of AI, sort of like, you know, vocal manipulation software to make it sound like they are this person who I'm a fan of.
I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's a music journalist this couple weeks ago. He had watched one of my videos that where I talked about this one Coldplay track that had 15 writers on it, and I always joke about those things, right? And he said, "Well, having 15 writers is basically AI." And I thought about it. I was like, "Yeah." When you take the experiences of 15 different musicians, songwriters, put them together, jumble them up. That's kind of what AI is. Something can do it a lot faster.
There is a truth to that. I guess at the end of the day, as long as it comes out with something people want to hear,
yes,
I feel like there is an argument to be made on behalf of that process. However, the real issue, the real problem is that the 15 artists, songs, creators, writers, whoever's work that AI model gets trained on, they're pretty much at this point are little to no rules, regulations, expectations in terms of those people being paid. So, 15 different people who made 15 different records could have their album right now. And there are many more than that in actuality. And, my hypothetical is not a hypothetical. It's real. You could have those 15 different records and 15 different creators all having their albums being trained by this AI model that's being trained on them. And it's essentially spitting out music that's copying that stuff. But those people are not being paid. Their work is not being acknowledged. They're not getting any credit. Some of these platforms you were mentioning earlier have literally spat out songs where, a vocal is on top of it and it sounds like Future. It's literally like Drake's voice.
Yeah.
It's literally like, the voice of some other very popular artist with tens of millions of listeners on Spotify. And then afterwards they're like, oh, whoops. We didn't know it was going to do that. We thought it might come out with some kind of amalgamation of like 4 or 5 different vocals from different places, but yet no, it just came out with a vocal that sounds exactly like this specific platinum selling artist's voice.
Oops.
So again, these people's work it's being copied and it's being rehashed by these programs, and they're getting no credit for it. They're getting no acknowledgement. And if there was actually some kind of process by which, okay, every single time your work is incorporated by our software, you get this amount of money, or you get this cut, or you get that. I mean, that would be one thing. There'd be, I feel like, a fairness there about that, even if we don't like the direction this is going in artistically. That's still money going in artists' pockets. And as long as that flow is continuing, there's still at least an incentive to create. But if you cut off that money and there's like no exchange there as a result of that, all you're doing is replacing artists and just telling them to fuck off. And just saying, well, we've replaced you. We've come up with essentially what you do, so you can just go away now.
My vibe is that people are going to listen to things that they like. They don't care whether it's AI created or not. And
they don't. They don't care at all.
The way that people used to get around using samples, the whole idea of interpolation was that they just do a re-record of it. Mm-hmm. And doing re-records of something that's AI generated, okay, so you create it with AI and then you just replay all the parts, recreate it in your own way. And I'm sure that there's some of that going on right now on records that are already out. And maybe that some of the AI created music actually improves what people do. Essentially you're competing against, whatever these models are trained upon, but you assume it's training it on all the possible combinations of chord progressions, melodies, beats, bass lines, sounds, things like that. So trying to come up with something that is really fresh might push songwriters and producers into going that extra step to try to create things that haven't been heard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think creativity, generally speaking, is going anywhere. And as long as this technology continues to grow and gain influence, like I have no doubt that even I myself am going to find myself in a position where like I'm enjoying something that has been aided or influenced or impacted by AI on some level. But, with that being said, and I know you've sort of like spoken to, these trends in videos that you've done as well. I don't know if this stuff is wholly being embraced because of just like how helpful or how ingenious or, how profoundly great it is. I think it's being embraced because for one, of convenience. And I feel like we're in an age where artists have to sort of like take advantage of every convenience that they can because they don't know whether or not a record that they're working on is going to be successful. I feel like the older model of doing things, which, you very much decried the death of on videos that you've done. I feel like a lot of artists would like to go back to that, but the thing is like, there's such a huge risk and potentially no money in like, hey, let's book a session. Let's book a session. Let's get 8 people in here. let's spend weeks on this, let's spend this amount of time on this. Let's do let's get ambitious. Let's do this. Let's do that. The only artists who I know who really sort of like embark on, that level of grandiosity are the ones who already have like tens of millions of followers and listeners and so on and so forth. And, with the way Spotify is currently going, and we haven't even really kind of addressed this part of it yet, through their algorithms, and as I'm sure you maybe have discussed at some point recently, the way that they've sort of like done that cutoff where, oh yeah, if your song doesn't have this amount of streams within a year, you get no money.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
I mean, it's saved them millions and millions of dollars. Right. I mean, for an individual artist, everybody may be sort of like looking at it and be like, so what? That's like that's a couple of pennies, da 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 da. But overall, that adds up to millions of dollars for Spotify. So they're saving themselves tons of money. And I think slowly what they're doing, and I think these rates will probably increase down the road in terms of like what the cutoff is. And I think Spotify and between that and their algorithms are going to just kind of like find more ways to essentially just say F you to independent artists and find a way to just kind of like further streamline and pipeline their platform and everything that it does toward, records owned by and supported by the majors, cut out more independent artists who aren't necessarily proving to be cash cows on the Spotify platform, and just kind of widen that monetary gap between the most successful and the most obscure among the artist community. And I feel like it's going to put artists in but genuine music fans in a position where like, okay, I go on this platform that's allegedly the biggest for music and the best for music, and I go on here and all I hear is just like the most generic mainstream crap that you could possibly imagine that has, no soul or artistry to it. It's just sort of like wash, rinse, repeat everything. Maybe it all becomes AI at that point. Who the hell knows? I want to hear an actual song made by an actual person. Where am I going to go for that? There's going to need to be an alternative. I don't know what that will be, or if there are some platforms out there that could sort of like serve as that in lieu of Spotify, but I potentially see things ending up in a place where people want to hear an actual musician express something genuine and create a real piece of art that comes from their heart. They're going to need to go somewhere else for that, because Spotify is going to either make it difficult to find that sort of thing on their platform, make it difficult to find it, hear it, stumble upon it, for a different sort of actual sort of like, genuine artistic experience. I think a lot of music fans and musicians may find themselves having to go elsewhere.
I think I was reading recently is that Spotify's talking about having a three-tiered system where
I feel like that's a part of the eventual process of it's, again, squeezing out smaller artists. The fact that they're constantly tiering it out now. It's like an artistic caste system.
Exactly.
Is essentially what they're doing.
When I do these Spotify top 10 countdowns, I do one every 4 months, just so people on my channel, because I have a lot of non-music people that follow my channel. And I do it because that's usually when there's a turnover of all the songs are different. It takes about 4 months for everything to play out that's in the top 10. And invariably, people will write in the comments section. I mean, I don't go through the comments except in the first 10 minutes or so to see if there's a dropout in the audio or something like that. But people will say, I don't believe these are the top songs in the top 10. That's not true. And and I think to myself, it's like, well, why wouldn't these be the most played songs?
I understand why people feel that way, and I'll try to explain. I'll tell anybody wondering that exactly why that is right now. Okay, it used to be, if your context for what popular music is, and this is very much my context, if your context for what popular music is like any major hit that you could possibly name in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, whatever, like the reason that we all had this kind of like monoculture type understanding of like, what the hits of the day are. It's Thriller. It's Hit Me Baby One More Time. It's, Smells Like Teen Spirit, is because this was music that was either created with the intention of, or, was kind of like groomed through the industry in order to hit in a way to where it just had a super broad appeal among as many people as possible, because if you were going to make money in music, that's how you made money. That's how you sold records. It had to be a record. If it was going to be a mainstream record, if it was going to be a hit record, it had to be an album that, appealed to a lot of different people from different backgrounds who wanted to hear different sounds, so on and so forth. We all love Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit. That is not a record that specifically only punks like, or specifically only metalheads, or specifically only just, kind of your general rock fan. That's a record that a lot of people like and enjoy. Everybody likes Nirvana. You know what I mean? That was what sort of like defined a hit-making artist or band during that time, a band that appealed widely. These days, what makes for a hit record or a hit artist or a hit song is not can that song be streamed or listened to by as many people as possible. That's popularity, wide popularity is definitely still a part of the equation. It can be. But specifically, the real way to make money and generate success as an artist these days is to make music that's endlessly replayable, respinnable over and over and over by a really passionate cult following of people. So that's why you have all these kind of like major top 10 hit songs where, you have a lot of people that look at these lists and they're like, I don't know who the fuck half these people are. And, it's like, I'm sure some people look at that and they're like, am I old or something? And it's like, no, there's a lot of young people that don't even know who these people are. But the thing is that, the reason they're hitting and the reason they're successful is not, again, it's not because they're appealing to as many people as possible. It's because, look at Taylor Swift. It's like, that record was one of the biggest albums of the year, the Tortured Poets Department. But there are tons of people who haven't even heard a single song off that album. Yeah. And it's all because, and they don't need to. They don't need to. The reason it's successful is because the Swifties are the ones that are listening to that album over and over and over and over. And she did the right thing by dropping a deluxe that's an entire other album of material. She just gave them more of what they're going to do. Don't give them one album that they're going to listen to 5 times. Give them 2 albums they're going to listen to 5, 10, 30 times and go over every single lyric and so on and so forth, in the way that they do. So that's the way you generate success in today's day and age. And, look, there's definitely artists out there who are still making music for, broad appeal. I mean, I think like, Chappell Roan, for example, is a bit of an anomaly in the pop sphere these days, in that I feel like she makes music that appeals to a lot of different types of music fans and different generations of music fans, without necessarily intending to do so, mind you. But, it just sort of happened to, I think, kind of turn out that way organically. But make no mistake, her music is also, very endlessly replayable. And is also sort of like succeeding within that model as well. But, the model these days is not about appealing to as many people broadly and even globally as you possibly can, like in the days of Michael Jackson. Right now it's about, can you get this kind of hardcore niche group of people to listen to this one thing as many times as possible, endlessly, almost. Yeah. That's really the way to sort of like, pop these records off and make money these days.
I was listening to Songs in the Key of Life, Stevie Wonder, yesterday, and I was thinking to myself, would any of those songs, Sir Duke, My Sherry Amore, I Wish, any of those songs be hits today? I mean, could Stevie Wonder break through? I don't know. What do you think?
I think the short answer is no, just based off of the fact that, like, current trends and aesthetics don't match, what those songs are, if you get what I'm saying. But simultaneously, I would also like to think, like, if somebody on Stevie's level of talent and ability were you to plop him in the music industry today and just sort of be like, okay, go, figure it out. I would like to think, as long as like the support and the resources were there and he wasn't faced with starvation, a lot of other, like a lot of artists are. And obviously Stevie had his own obstacles to overcome, clearly, in his day and age. But still, with that being said, if the resources and the time were there for him to do what he needed to do, I would like to think that he would be able to mold himself, to what was in front of him in order to see success and create what needed to be created in order to sort of like reach the audience that he wanted to reach. I mean, I feel like if you're a creative person, regardless of what the paradigm is thrown in front of you, you'll find your way to work through it. I think like the real sort of like hardest obstacles that are put in front of artists these days are again, time and resources, because I feel like everybody generally has found ourselves in a place between the internet and work and cost of living and so on and so forth, where there's not as much time. There's just not as much time. Much time
for sure.
to, for personal stuff to create, but also to explore. I feel like I've found myself in a place where when I'm doing reviews of certain artists, especially if they're more obscure, sometimes there's not as much of an audience for that sort of thing because music that's more obscure, more challenging, requires more time to consume and process and understand. And a lot of the time when people are going on platforms like Spotify, because they've just made it so easy and convenient and simple, like they're just looking to hear something familiar. They're just looking to hear the easiest thing to digest or have on in the background without actually having to think about it. Because, the day is so hard and stressful and traumatic anyway, without having to, add an experimental avant-garde noise artist on top of it.
Right.
When all is said and done. But unfortunately, I think that's put things in a place where stuff that's kind of like really challenging the status quo and challenging people's conception of sound and what music can be, there's not as much bandwidth for it, not as much of a concept for it. I feel like Spotify has put a lot of listeners in a place where they're not being confronted with anything else other than what they're familiar with, which is a strange place, I feel like, to find, at least from my observations. It's a strange place to find a lot of young music listeners in, because I feel like when I started my YouTube channel, we were kind of reaching a point where a lot of younger listeners were almost like jaded and feeling like they've heard everything.
Yeah.
And there's, nothing that could like really phase them. And, artists like, let's say, for example, Marilyn Manson, who, existed and basked in a whole decade of being like, the number one shock rocker. People look at him and are like, who cares? These days, I feel like there are a lot of younger listeners who are seeing like, artists who are here and there on social media, either being really abrasive in their sound or sort of really upfront about their sexuality or whatever. And it's almost like, you're watching them be shocked. And it's like, I thought you guys have seen everything. I thought you guys have been getting exposed to everything. What's going on? I feel like these algorithms are narrowing people's experiences in a way to where they're not getting, that exposure to anything that's like kind of popping that bubble or sort of like, getting into that echo chamber of whatever it is that social media is feeding them. And again, as a result, I feel like art is kind of being hurt as a result of it, because weirder stuff, more experimental stuff, which, I mean, Spotify has had in its sights in a way to where they've almost like made an enemy of that scene, in a nemesis sort of way, because they've been finding ways to either replace that stuff through AI and through ambient playlists and so on and so forth. Or literally deride that sort of stuff in comments or, pressers that they're doing where they're like, yeah, all this kind of weird music, there's like no real place for any of this stuff. We're going to find ways to demonetize stuff that's like field recordings and stuff that we don't even really deem music, honestly, but simultaneously we're going to pocket as much money that we can off of fake AI music.
Absolutely.
So, there's a hostility, that is what I wanted to say, toward that sort of stuff on the Spotify platform. And I feel like that's going to continue to expand as they realize that, if we keep narrowing down our algorithms and the focus and the user base on our platform to just the candy, and we don't feed anybody else, we're just giving them the candy. And as long as we do that and continue to force that, we make more money, we're just going to keep doing that. And I feel like the temptation to keep putting money in shareholders' pockets is going to be too great, and they're going to continue fucking over artists and fucking over listeners for the sake of that.
Anthony, so a lot of people don't realize that you and I have been friends. I've been on your channel before, and I really appreciate your takes on music. I think you're brilliant. You're hysterically funny. When you do your spottle or whatever, and you guess things, or you'll listen to just a drum beat, and you do so many different things. You'll do these things on TikTok typically, and you're incredibly knowledgeable about so many genres. And I encourage my people that don't know you, that are watching this, to go follow your channel. I'll put the links in for your different social media platforms. And I just really, I think you're great, man. And I appreciate everything you do. So I appreciate you hanging out with me today.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's why I've had you on my channel too. I think you do cool stuff. I think you bring a perspective that people need to be like reminded of. I think you have an experience and a knowledge base that like is difficult to find in the music, commentary sphere. I mess with anybody who sort of like comes at what they do from a point of passion, regardless of their, sort of like, experience level, because there was a point at which I was kind of doing this and I was still figuring out how and figuring out, what I should know or needed to know in order to sort of accomplish my goals. But, you come at it with an experience that, again, I don't feel like a lot of people kind of bring to the table, not only in terms of like time, but what you've done, in the music industry over the course of your lifetime.
Cool. Well, thanks. Appreciate it, Anthony.
Well, thank you.